Well, welcome to a bonus episode of the Ridgecrest podcast. I'm Michael Estes, the senior pastor, and I am here today with Matt Cloyd, our executive pastor. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
It is still morning. So
It is.
In these bonus episodes, what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to get to know our staff here, the first few episodes. And so, Matt, tell us what it means when I say executive pastor.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. I guess it. I guess it depends on the day, but the way I kind of like to think about it is, you as our senior pastor is our kind of vision caster, for a lack of a better term, and kind of give us direction as where you want us to go for a staff. I like to see myself as the guy who kind of puts the puzzle together. Mm-hmm. You kind of create the picture of what the box and the puzzle should look like, and I like to put the pieces where they need to be so we get that picture.
Right.
And that's essentially what I see on that kind of executive side of it. And then from my understanding, that whenever they were creating my position,
Yep.
there was a lot of discussion as far as what to officially call it and that sort of thing. And so technically, my full position is executive.
I left out part of it.
Yeah, slash, and apparently there was a lot of discussion on that slash. Should
That's
it be
right.
executive and discipleship? Is it executive slash discipleship? Is it discipleship slash executive? Apparently there's a lot of discussion on that.
Sure.
I wasn't privy to that because I wasn't here yet. But so I do have that slash discipleship, and again, I really view that as part of under that executive aspect of it too, where again, you have a heart for discipleship, and so I want to facilitate that in the way that you see kind of where we go in that, and I'll put the pieces and figure out the logistics side of it, and so that's kind of the way I view that role. Whether you're talking about the executive side or discipleship side, is really you're giving us a picture. I'm figuring out where the pieces go.
Yeah, to be honest with you, Matt is a Swiss Army knife. Like, he has got so many different skills and things that he can do that you guys don't know about, and some of y'all do probably know some of the things that. But I'll be honest with you, with COVID being my first full year of ministry, if Matt had not been here, y'all probably would have looked for somebody else pretty quickly, because he saved me on a number of occasions from the organizational pieces, that putting the puzzle together. That was a huge part of what we had to do here, and he helped us do that. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask all of our staff is, how did you come to know Jesus? What is that story? Can you share your testimony with us? Sure. Kind of like, how did you come to know him, and how's that worked out in your life?
Yeah. Well, growing up, some people may or may not, I came from a divorce household. Mm-hmm. And so the way my parents worked that out was they had joint custody. And so I was typically with my mom through the week and with my dad on the weekends. Mm-hmm. And so when I was 8 years old or so, when we actually started going to church, and I started going with Dad since I was with him on the weekends. And so started, going and attending and those kind of aspects. And then, when I was about 8, 9 years old, started recognizing that, understanding who Jesus was, mm-hmm. and this idea of salvation and him providing that. And so walked through that, prayed, through that, and, kind of turned my life to Jesus in that moment. Walked the aisle, went down, met with the pastor, got baptized, kind of went through all those steps, and, recognized that I was a follower of Jesus at that time. However, over the next several years beyond that, I started, really almost immediately jumping into service, and, I can remember as a 6th, 7th grader, serving in preschool, and I was partnered with someone who, a lady who, was great. She was a consistent volunteer in preschool ministry and did that every, I think at that point it was, once a month we were on a rotation. And so every month I was her kind of partner as a 6th grader, and she taught me what it meant to minister to these preschoolers and kind of create that opportunity. As I got into older high school, I started serving kind of with the older elementary kids and doing some storytelling stuff with them, and,
mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. And so I was pretty active, from that moment on, of even being a young child, turning my life to Christ. We got pretty active in the church kind of from then on out, and that sort of thing. But as I got older, and I was, I guess, probably my sophomore through senior year of high school, was still involved, still actively served in the church, but it was starting to really become where I was just doing a lot of stuff, and I wasn't really growing spiritually, or really wasn't, I was doing that because I kind of felt like that's what I was supposed to do, and I wasn't really growing spiritually. And so those later high school years, I felt like I was just kind of going through the motions and, that sort of thing. And then it was that once I graduated, there were a lot of things that kind of changed. We'll probably talk about this more later, but I had a youth pastor who really took me under his wing and, started really discipling me. you know, and so it was that kind of transition from, you know, my high school career to college career, that after that kind of freshman year of college, when I really kind of came back and started to really understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and it was no longer kind of going through the motions or just doing certain things, but I was, you know, trying to be active and growing spiritually, and from that flowed the areas of service. And so I always think back at that moment of, even though I know without a doubt I professed my faith in Jesus as an 8 or 9-year-old kid, it was that freshman year of college when I really began to come back around and really understand what it means to really be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I heard you say is that there was a lay leader in the church that discipled you, and then a staff member that really took the time. And I think one of the things that, you know, we're passionate about is our people understanding that the work of ministry is not something that just the staff does, but it's something that we across the board as Ridgecrest are passionate about. And I think your story is a good story in illustrating why that matters. So, you know, if the lady that came alongside you and kind of helped you integrate your service with your life as a believer early on, if that hadn't happened, you may have turned out completely different as far as like not seeing that service is a major part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And okay, so kind of transitioning now from just starting to really understand what that means for your life to be a follower of Jesus through that student pastor and kind of growing in that. How did you end up in ministry? Because I know a little bit about this story, and some of us may know a good bit about the story, but I'd love to hear you tell us how you ended up in ministry.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, kind of through those, you know, middle school and high school years, I was pretty active in serving in the church, and, you know, really involved in ministry in that aspect. And through those years, specifically as I was, you know, kind of coming at 8th grade, 9th grade, you know, even in 10th grade before I, you know, started to, you know, really wrestle with it, you know, people were always telling me, oh, you're going to be a pastor. You're going to go into ministry. You're going to do this. And
people did not tell me that.
and
I don't know what that means.
Well, you know, and at the time, I wish they had not told me that, because every time someone said that, I'm like, no, that is not me. I have no interest in doing that. I don't even know what that means, you know, because again, no one in my family was involved in like full-time ministry as we kind of call it now. And, you know, but people would always say, oh yeah, you're going to go into ministry. You're going to go into ministry. And I never, you know, it really almost turned me off of ministry a little bit, because I was constantly being told this. And, you know, I was like, no, at that point in time, you know, I went through several different careers, things that I wanted to do, you know, and, you know, at that time of my life, you just was kind of always putting that, you know, behind. But then
what were some of the other careers that you did in between? Just curious.
Early middle school, I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Oh, wow.
I was convinced that there was a cure for cancer somewhere in the middle of the ocean, you know, and so I had set my mind, say I'm going to be a marine biologist, and I'm going to find this cure for cancer. Don't know where it came from, but that was it. And then I took biology, I think my sophomore year of high school, and realized that, I don't know about this, you know, and so quickly changed there. You know, maybe before that, I can remember, you know, there was a period of time whenever I liked the idea of politics, you know, and even, you know, had a dream to become the president one day. And so, you know, I was always kind of, you know, looking for the crazy thing. And then, you know, I'm trying to remember some other things. Those are the two
kind of stand out,
that stand out most. But yeah, and so that was, you know, always, you know, kind of me. And then that, as I went through that kind of period of 10th grade through, you know, my senior year of high school, kind of wrestling with what that next chapter of my life would look like, and really struggling with some things. There was this kind of youth pastor transition where up until 10th grade, I didn't really have a youth pastor, because right when I came into youth ministry, the youth pastor that had been there for several years left, and there was a period of kind of turmoil and unrest a little bit in that ministry. And so finally, my sophomore year of high school, new guy comes in. At the time, I'm like, well, I'm just 2 years away from graduating. I don't really need this new guy. I don't really have any interest in getting to know this new guy. I'm just trying to finish out my high school career, and then I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to leave town, not look back, kind of thing. And, you know, and so I was not, you know, the ideal student to this youth pastor. I was probably one that, you know, I was looked at as the one who, you know, there was potential for me to be a leader, and you could tell he was trying to lead into that, because we didn't have a youth pastor, and for whatever reason, I got put into that place of leadership, and all the students looked up to me and as kind of this leader, and so I was setting a pretty poor example of leadership at the time. But go through that, and then, you know, but this youth pastor continued, you know, to kind of pour into me, and then eventually we became great friends, and that kind of after my senior year, when I ended up staying local in town, he kind of took me under his wing as far as really developing me as a leader. And we walked through some leadership books and took me to some conferences that were specifically to like ministry leaders. And Catalyst was one of those conferences, and really began to pour into me as a Christian leader. And so and I would say it was through that and through his leadership when I really began to kind of come around and realize that God had called me to ministry. It just took me a little while to figure that out.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So before I ask the next question, there's a question that I didn't put in our question, so I'm going to hit you with kind of one out of the blue. What was your first job in ministry?
I was actually a part-time youth pastor.
Okay.
Was my first paid position.
Yeah.
And that was actually to step in as an interim because the youth pastor, and it was actually in my home church, the youth pastor that had discipled me was taking a kind of a family pastor role at another church in his hometown. And so the church at the time asked me, said, hey, would you care to step in? Because at this point I had worked very closely with that youth pastor and kind of knew how things were set up and how things were operating. It's like, can you kind of maintain this while we look for someone else? And so that's kind of, I stepped into that part-time at the time. I was actually working full-time at a collection agency. I was calling people about their past due Home Depot credit card bills right in the middle of our 2008 recession.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that was
plenty of calls to make.
There were very, very plenty calls to make. So that was interesting. And so did that for about 6 months before that church actually asked me to come on full time, and then I stepped into that youth ministry position full time.
That's cool. It's cool to see the full circle of that your youth pastor pouring into you, and then you eventually taking on that role.
Yeah.
All right. This sounds like a weird question to follow up with, but I think it helps us understand some of your passions in life and that sort of thing. So, what would you be doing if you weren't doing ministry?
Yeah. Easiest answer would be I would probably be a pilot, professional pilot somewhere. Got my pilot's license when I was in high school, and when I graduated high school, that's what I was doing. I had a scholarship to go to Middle Tennessee State University to do their professional pilot program, full ride kind of scholarship kind of stuff. My parents, just a few months before me graduating high school, my dad and stepmom and brother and sister, they actually had moved to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where MTSU is, and so I was going to be living with them. So it worked out. It was kind of like all these pieces were falling into place because Dad had transferred there for work, and got all worked out. Went to orientation, did all that stuff. But for whatever reason, that summer I really wrestled with the idea of moving down there and didn't know what it was. I just couldn't get motivated to do it. And so about a week before school started, I tried to apply to a local community college because they had a transfer program where I could do a couple of basic stuff and then do that. And so week before class was supposed to start, I applied, got enrolled, and made that transition and stayed local. And my parents were not super excited about that. But
hey, we moved, and now you're not moving with us.
Yeah, and so it was a interesting period of time, and but that was kind of, I still, even though went through that, still had this idea that I was going to be a professional pilot. And then that freshman year of college, was not motivated at all. If I'm not mistaken, I think my GPA dropped to about a 1.4 because I didn't go to class.
For those who aren't sure, that's not good.
not good at all. And either slept through class or did not go to class that year. And then it was
the fact that you made a 1.4 by sleeping through class or not going to class is pretty impressive.
Fair enough. It's so did that, and then that next summer is when I started realizing God was calling in ministry. And that next year, got back in school and started shifting my focus away from the pilot stuff and figuring out ministry specific, and so changed my degree to psychology and things like that. And so did that, ended up graduating with I think 3.4, 3.6 something. So turn it around. And I always kind of look back at that and seeing that when you're in the middle of what God's wanting you to do, things tend to work out a little bit better. But
and for those who know Matt, this, but like you haven't given up.
No, you're
piloting.
That's
like
right.
You're working on getting certified and doing certain things with being a pilot still.
Sure, yeah, and flying still something I love to do, and I even think about it now. It's like while I probably would have been a professional pilot, I don't know how much I would have enjoyed that. Just flying airliners around here and there. There are definitely perks to it.
Yeah.
But I think still, and again, I think I was given a unique opportunity to get my pilot's license the way I was, and so continue to work towards that and continue to just become a better pilot. And even if opportunity opens itself up to where I, can, do some like flight instruction and stuff on the side and use that as a ministry opportunity, it's kind of the way I view being a pilot now is I don't need to just go fly an airline, but I can use that for ministry, even if it's not my official role to do.
Yeah. Love that. All right, shifting gears a little bit. So we just went through a unprecedented pandemic. We experienced a year and a half roughly of massive interruption and upheaval in our society. It affected everything. It affected schools. It affected hospitals. It affected daily work schedules. It affected churches.
Yeah.
It affected a lot of the decisions that we made here. And so just to kind of give us an idea, like how has the last year affected or changed your perspective on ministry?
Yeah. I would say it's even still kind of a work in progress because there are certain things that going through, I could really go two different routes with this question is talk about the administrative side of the church function as far as the planning and being prepared for really anything and stuff like that, but I feel like, that, kind of works itself out, but the side that kind of really changed my perspective is, how we shifted and you kind of had this period of, like where we're there for a while, we were working at home and things like that. And I've shared this with our staff as some things that I've kind of wrestled with is that was a very unique period of time for ministry for me because I was working from home, had a young child at home, I was going into it, not looking forward to it at all, because I knew that I was not going to be able to really focus and get stuff done. If I knew, my son was running around in the next room, I just knew he was going to keep kind of coming back in and wanting to play and have a good time whenever there was stuff I had to get done. So I was not looking forward to it, but then ended up, after having 4, 6, 8 weeks, however long it ended up being of working from home, it ended up being a really good thing, and so trying to figure out and still kind of wrestling through what that looks like post COVID, and figuring out what ministry can look like for the family because ministry's tough whenever it comes to the family and making sure you have time and, you're prioritizing them and, the stress of ministry can overflow into that. And so there are a lot of things. And so, but last year through that period of time, while I would say I was doing at least the same amount of work as I was, if not more, me having that time with my family, it was a lot more healthy. Even though I was doing just as much, if not more work, it didn't feel like it. Yeah. And so trying to figure out what that looks like moving forward for all of our staff, and figuring out how to really prioritize that family time and prioritize what that looks like. I'm not saying that we're going to close our offices and everybody's just going to work from home from now on, but just trying to figure out something. And so it's just giving me a new perspective in that. And I don't really have an answer of what that looks like yet, but that's kind of where I'm at right now, kind of wrestling through and figuring out what that could look like for me as well as our staff as a whole.
Yeah. I think it's important that it is while it was a terrible time, there was a lot of bad that went on. It was a unique opportunity to reassess and get perspective on how do we spend our time, what should we prioritize, those sorts of things. And it was a hard reset in a lot of ways. And so I think it's probably a good way to look at it, the way you're thinking about it. Okay, so we talked about a difficult time in ministry. Tell me about your best moment or best time period of ministry and why was it so good?
Yeah. I keep kind of coming back to my last couple of years in student ministry. At this point, in time, our student ministry kind of had grown numerically. We're having a lot of different students, but this period of time I'm kind of looking at specifically is I had this kind of new group of sixth graders coming in. I had just completed, I guess, my first, entire group of students that going kind of from 6th grade through 12th grade. They had just graduated.
How long were you there?
In student ministry, I was in that for probably eight and a half years.
Yeah. Okay. So there's going to be, I'll come back to this a little bit more in just a minute, but for our listeners, one of the things that I think it's important that you understand is that that is not normal. Right. And in student ministry or in ministry in general, the life of ministry positions typically is about 18 months.
Yeah.
That's the average.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah. If
that means-
you're in it for 3 years, you're considered a veteran.
Yes.
Yeah, because that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. So I think that really is important in understanding why this may have been one of the best moments, is because there is a longevity that's required in order for you to really be able to pastor people and love people.
Yeah.
So anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt your story,
No,
but it's just
no,
something that I think is important that we think about.
Yeah, that's good. And so this was, I was probably, this period I'm looking at is probably year 6 when I had the first 6th grade class get all the way through 12th grade. So I kind of had seen some fruit from that. But again, I was young. I didn't know what I was doing the first half of that.
Right.
And so really, it was just, me trying to figure things out. So at this point in time, I had probably 6 years in. Now I had this new group of 6th graders coming in where I kind of could see where those 6th graders got when they graduated, where they didn't get to, what I kind of would have liked to have seen them get to. And so this next group coming in gave me the opportunity to really start focusing in on some of those other things. And so I remember, giving these kids, very specific attention. I remember that first meeting I had with this specific group of 6th, graders, and then that next group, kind of coming up, and so this would become these 6th and 7th graders. I would work with them very closely over the next 2-3 years in ministry, specifically in youth ministry, and really got to pour into them and really saw some significant growth as middle schoolers go, and just had a lot of fun. It was just it was a neat time, to kind of see where we were going. And unfortunately, I only was with them until, I guess they were 9th and 10th graders whenever I, stepped out of that position. And so I didn't even get to see them get all the way. But those periods of time, kind of from them being 6th, the early high school students saw so much growth. And, even a couple of those students, even when I stepped out of youth ministry, got to continue that relationship. And one of those students I took to a leadership conference, not last year because it was COVID, but the year before that. So I was here,
I remember that.
having, not in youth ministry anymore, but I still had that student where I had made a commitment to those students and said, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to work through this together. And so that I still think back of those last few years of me being in youth ministry as being kind of the highlight, and just saw a lot of really good things, had, a lot of fun. And it was just a interesting period of time to kind of see that, and having learned through those, early growing pains of student ministry, and then recognizing what was most important and being able to pour in and see that.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that we don't talk about enough in ministry circles is so much of ministry is not instant gratification. It is a long, slow work. I like Eugene Peterson's way of saying it, is discipleship is a long obedience in the same direction.
Right.
And we just don't talk about that very much. We try a lot of times to create programs or cast this vision that we think that will create instantaneous growth, and all of a sudden everything will be better or different. And the reality of the situation is that loving people toward Christ is a very slow and a lot of times hard process, and requires growth on our part, growth on their part. And that's why Paul uses a lot of like agricultural and farming analogy Jesus does to to help describe what this is like. And so I think it's interesting that you brought up it was a period after you'd been there for a while in order for that to be the case. I remember my pastor in North Carolina, who I've referenced a bunch of times before, but one of the things that stood out to me as a young student in ministry, and trying to understand what it meant to be in ministry, he told our congregation one night that it was 8 years that he had been there, and that was the first time he'd really felt like their pastor. Yeah. And that just kind of blew me away. Like, no, you got hired from day one. You should feel like their pastor, but it spoke to this is what it takes to get to know people and to love people. And so, anyways, I think it's good that you mentioned that. All right. Yeah. So not long ago, I was listening to a podcast, and I shared it with you guys. And one of the things that was brought up on that podcast was the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. So a lot of times we focus on, in ministry, we focus on resume virtues. How fast did you grow a ministry? How big did it get? What programs did you create? Those sorts of things. the difference, the kind of the counterbalance to that, and probably the thing that matters way more if you look at the requirements for ministry in the New Testament, or what I would call eulogy virtues. What do you want people to say about you when you die?
Yeah.
I don't think a whole lot of us are going to care very much if somebody says I grew in ministry from 5 to 50. At the end of my life, that's not going to matter that much.
Yeah.
I want to hear people say that I loved them well, or that I was faithful, or those sorts of things. And so, what do you want people to say about you when you retire from ministry?
Yeah. To be honest, I like kind of being behind the scenes, and it's changed. Early on in ministry, I was much more extroverted, and so personality has changed a little bit. But as I kind of think about that question, I care a lot about leadership development. That's something that I'm trying to finish a doctorate on, and I've learned a lot on. And specifically, that period of time that I talked about was the greatest in ministry, was that period of time where I had these students that I was really able to pour this into. And so, really, when I think about that, the best kind of what I would want people to say, whenever I retire from ministry is, them to be talking about those specific students, or other individuals that I have the opportunity to lead and pour into, is talking about what they're doing in ministry. I don't even care if my name's mentioned, because and specifically kind of going back to that last group that I really had the opportunity to pour into. I can I'll name drop some of them. Like specifically Ben and Drew and Chloe and Luke, and you have some of these students that Jordan, and I can go on in this little group that Mason, Sierra, that I just had the opportunity to really build relationships with. I want them and others that I minister to as I continue ministry to become Christian leaders. Whether they're pastors, whether they're teachers, whether they're coaches, whatever occupation they find themselves in, I want them to be known as Christian leaders in that field.
Yeah.
And if they are recognized in that capacity, and they are leading people to Christ, and they are discipling others, that's, I would much rather them be known, even, if my name's not associated with it, but if I can look back and kind of see those leaders that, I had the opportunity to pour into, growing and developing and being disciple makers in whatever field they're called to, that's my desire. A lot of times, I'm perfectly fine if people say, well, Matt, he never did anything, because I don't care what people see, whether I'm doing behind the scenes or not, but I want to be intentional in that, so that way the people that I'm discipling are spoken very highly of.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, man. All right, so that pretty much does it as far as getting to know you a little bit better. If there's one thing that you could share with our people at Ridgecrest that you hope for them, what is that thing?
Same thing, that I would kind of say is, I want our people at Ridgecrest to be intentional disciple makers wherever they find themselves. We have a large staff here, but we have an even larger congregation. That congregation's filled up with people who are, business professionals, teachers, medical professionals, whatever. We have tons of different people. But I want them to figure out what it means, again, to be a Christian leader in that field, whatever field they're in, that you don't have to be a pastor to be in full-time ministry. I believe that every one of us are called to full-time ministry. It's just some of us are called to that to be paid by a church, but some of us are paid by a hospital. Some of us are paid by a school system or whatever it might be. And so that would be kind of my thing is, I want you to figure out what that means to be a Christian leader in your field. And I would say if you're wrestling with that and wanting to know what that looks like and how to do that, that's where I want to be, And so if you're listening, or watching this podcast, and you want someone to just come alongside you and walk through and figure out what that looks like, or figure out how to become, a leader in that field or whatever it is, I want to come alongside you and help in that and walk through that with you, because I have no idea what it means to be a medical professional.
Yeah.
But, I can help you walk through and figure out what it means to be a Christian leader in that field. And so that would be my desire, is that everyone at Ridgecrest recognize that calling to be in full-time ministry, whatever occupation they have.
Yeah. And so the way I want to wrap this up is to say this, that if you want to get to know Matt even more, you can feel free to reach out to him. Stephen will link his information from the church in the video description of this video, and we'll make sure that you have a way of contacting Matt so that you can find out more about how to be a Christian leader, or how to plug in here at our church, and to have the opportunity to serve here, to serve in your community, and so because that's what we want for you. We want you to be able to be fully effective disciples here at Ridgecrest. We want to grow disciples, and we want to make disciple makers, and so both of us have that same passion and care about that. We're glad that you joined us today, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks for being here.